Welcome to this channel, which is devoted to a reading and better understanding of the book Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. Today we're on the 31st chapter of the second book, and as you recall, St. John has been discussing locutions. The first kind is called successive locutions. The second kind is called formal locutions. And now with this chapter, St. John is discussing substantial locutions. Substantial locutions are actually a subcategory of formal locutions, since every substantial locution is also a formal locution. You may recall that in the last chapter, St. John told us that formal locutions generally don't produce significant effects in our souls. St. John told us that successive locutions would be related to objects of our meditation. And though St. John doesn't state it outright, he seems to suggest that formal and substantial locutions might not be related to an object of religious meditation. For instance, maybe you had something like this happen to you. Perhaps from out of the blue it seemed as if somebody told you, go back to your house and turn off the oven. And then you go back to your house and son of a gun, the oven was still on and you turned it off. Maybe it was a natural experience and maybe we just remembered that we had forgotten to turn off that oven. But maybe this was a locution that came from God. And if it was a locution, it probably would have been a formal locution and not a substantial locution, because it wouldn't have probably left much of a lasting spiritual effect on our soul. In contrast, formal locutions produce vivid and substantial effects on the soul. St. John tells us that formal locutions are greatly conducive to union with God. And this is only the second phenomenon that we've discussed so far that St. John tells us that we don't have to reject. With the formal locution, it's as if God telepathically talks to the soul but doesn't use words. And the soul receives the firm and sudden impression that God is saying something like, be good, or love me, or don't be afraid, or everything will be okay. Immediately upon receiving the locution, there will be an effect that the soul will desire to do good and conform itself to God's will for the love of God. Or that the soul will know not to be afraid because everything's going to be okay. And His Word is full of power. Whatever God tells the soul will be the effect that is produced in the soul. And this is what King David meant when he said, behold, He will give to His voice the voice of power. St. John tells us that God's words in substantial locutions are imbued with the same power as His Word was in the Gospels when He healed the sick and raised the dead with just the mere utterance of a few words. His words are of incomparable good to a soul. Just one of these words works more good within a soul than we might have accomplished in our whole lifetime through our own efforts. With respect to these words, the soul should do nothing. It should neither desire them nor refrain from desiring them. It should neither reject them nor fear them. It should do nothing in the way of executing what these words express, for these substantial words are never pronounced by God in order that the soul may translate them into action, but that He may translate them within the soul. Herein they differ from the formal and successive words. By passively receiving the locution, but making no real effort beyond that, the soul is cooperating with God and preparing itself with resignation and humble affection to receive greater favors. St. John wrote, I say that the soul must neither desire nor refrain from desiring, since its desire is not necessary for God to translate these words into effect, nor is it sufficient for the soul to refrain from desiring in order for the said effect not to be produced. So let the soul rather be resigned and humble with respect to them. It must not reject them, since the effect of these words remains substantially within it, and is full of the good which comes from God. As the soul receives this good passively, its action is at no time of any importance. This is a supernatural phenomenon, where St. John tells us that we shouldn't fear deception by the devil. The devil can't leave a soul with the good effects that come from a locution from God. As we discussed in the last installment, the devil's locutions don't produce much of an effect at all. However, if a person who has not progressed receives a locution, that person might be shocked to receive a communication from a third party when that person might not have ever really acknowledged the existence of a supernatural entity. And so, even if it's a formal locution, not a substantial locution, that effect will be to suddenly shock that person into being aware of the supernatural. And how a person responds to that new information might vary from person to person. And other than that effect, the devil's locutions can't succeed in passively producing a profound effect on the soul, unless that the soul has already given itself over to the devil by a voluntary compact, meaning that the person has sold their soul to the devil or given their soul to the devil. The devil can cause great harm to even good people with his suggestions, so with people who have already given themselves over to him, the devil is no longer just trying to subtly introduce error. He outright makes gross evil suggestions to those people, and the effects from the devil's locutions further unite that individual with the devil in perversity. But in summary, substantial locutions can only come from God. The more interior they are, the more substantial they are, and the greater profit they bring. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Well, thank you for watching this installment. We'll be back again in about a week with another one. In the meantime, please pray for the church.
No more, my Lord. No more, my Lord. Lord, I'll never turn back. No.